get the fuck up. Simon says, get the fuck up, throw your hands in the sky.
I think for me, the last few years, I've basically been at a point where I felt like I was pretty confident in what I was doing in the gym, where I would be able to get good results in my meets, to maybe win a lot of the meets. And it was worth it during that time to push through a lot of injuries. And they definitely have added up, and now finally it kind of caught up with me, and I'm sitting out with a surgery that I'm recovering from. But the perspective I have right now is, it's funny because I do a lot of personal training, and so whether I'm training 20-something-year-old or 70-year-old, the only way you can get stronger is when you're actually in the gym. So the idea of focusing on quality of motion and taking care of your body like you're a high-performance athlete, not like a workhorse, I think that's pretty important. So it's important that you can balance out, when to push hard in the gym and when to sort of give your body a chance to kind of rebuild and be ready to perform well again. So that's pretty critical. I think, you just have to manage yourself. In terms of longevity, the things that you can do to optimize your performance versus stress on the body, basically technique. I think there's a million things that people would sell you to, heal faster, and that's fine. Anyone can kind of figure that out. But I think for me, the things like stretching, getting ART work, getting the chiro, all the things that kind of help me between gym sessions to kind of get me ready for the next session so that I can actually execute the technique I'm trying. I think those are pretty helpful. And if your goal is between workout sessions is to recover, then doing things like getting the muscles loosened up so that they're actually resting between training sessions is pretty critical too.
Some things that when I look back on and that I've learned since retiring, if you want to call it retiring, from the sport with longevity is know your genetics. If you have a predisposition to arthritis, know that, because your wear and tear on the joints is going to be different than somebody else, and all movement is wear and tear. So if you're doing 1,000 reps of mobility work and you have a genetic predisposition to arthritis, you're wearing your shit out faster. There's other ways to warm up and other ways to keep your range of motion without doing excessive mobility work. The other thing is with recovery modalities is to understand that your body will adapt to them the same way it will adapt to training. So you need to change them. So if you're always using massage therapy, use that for a while, flip it out to ART, flip it out to, Grayson, flip it out to, there's hundreds of different things, but don't stick with the same one over and over and over and over, because it's gonna stop working and make it harder for you to recover. What I would actually recommend is try a lot of different things and find what works best, and then put that in your back pocket and use it before a meet, and then try the other things. That way you can go into the meet the healthiest. I advise people now after a meet to actually take the bar off their back and out of their hands for a period of time. Personally, I like 8 weeks, but it depends upon how advanced they are and how long they've trained for the meet. The reason for that is the bar sits on your back, which is your nervous system, it's your spinal column. You want to kind of take the load off that for a little while. Bars in your hands or your neck, shoulders, let that recover for a little while. And I hate it's kind of like talking to a wall with this. Back off when you know you need to back off, but it's kind of talking to, like I said, it's talking to a wall, because an advanced lifter, they're going to do what they think that they need to do, and they got two voices in their head, so listen to the voice that's telling you to back down a little bit more, which I don't think you really get to that point until you get hurt enough that you realize maybe I don't need as much training. And the other thing is, in any training program, if I was to take what you did for that day, and I should be able to ask you every single exercise, why is this here? And you should be able to tell me. And if you can't, it probably shouldn't be there. So that's a good check and balance for that.
Yeah, I think the last thing I would add in too is, if you just go from one meet to the next without really having a long-term plan, that's something that you could benefit from as well. You know, so if you say, well, I want to do, let me plan out my year, you know, you could have maybe 2 or 3 meets, but you know, if you have 4 or 5 meets and you do like a big weight cut for every one of those, you're incurring a lot more stress on the body. You know, the meet itself is stressful. When you cut weight for a meet or diet down for a meet, that's even more kind of risk and stress when you do it. You know, so the idea of having a set number of meets to do in a year, having phases where you're deloaded after meets or between training cycles, and even meets where you say, this meet I'll cut and it's a big meet, this meet I'm just going to show up at my training weight and compete, which is a lot less stressful to do it that way. So I think having sort of a long-term plan and being able, like he said, even whether it's just one exercise in your training or, you know, just one meet in the year, why are you doing something? And you have to have kind of a context for whatever you're doing. Does it go back to your ultimate goals, you know, when as a trainer, whether you're, you know, just training for powerlifting or you have other things that you do as well? You just got to kind of relate everything back to a goal, so you have context.
Why don't you talk about having a meet strategy? Like you're a beginner, intermediate coming into the sport. What's the end game? I mean, they should have some type of strategy on what meets they're going to do and where they're going to work towards. So how would you advise that?
Yeah, I think as a beginner or intermediate, you know, it's nice to have goals like I would like to get, you know, I'd like to qualify for a nationals or I'd like to hit an elite total. But at the same time, like you said, keeping an eye on sort of like a long-term goal of, you know, what's your potential? You know, how far do you think that you could push the envelope? Or, you know, having that long-term perspective is kind of important, because if you go to a meet and you kind of play all your best cards just to, you know, get this like little bitty increment in total when you're a beginner, that's a lot of stress, and it doesn't necessarily go in line with getting you to be the best lifter you can. You know, it takes many years to become a great lifter, and that's because you need the technique, you need the experience of going to meets and having, you know, failures, the experience of going to meets that you've cut for, or that you've dieted for, or that you just showed up and gotten big for. So I think all those things are important, and if you want to just say that one day you're going to be ready to go to the meet, but you haven't built up the experience, you still can be just as strong as you could be, but not necessarily perform well. You know, I've had lifters that go to meets and they'll bomb out, and it's like, at the moment you see them and they're like crying or they're really, you know, disappointed, but as the coach, you know, other than feeling, you know, responsible in part if they did something that I could have changed, you know, I know that there's a certain component of failure that allows you to kind of be more experienced and tougher and smarter. I definitely, you know, things like cutting weight for a first meet, I feel like are probably a little bit short-sighted, and then limiting. It kind of limits your expectations for yourself. I mean, I didn't become a lifter to get smaller. So when I did my first meet, I wasn't looking at getting to a smaller weight class. It was just like, I want to get jacked still. That was still in my mindset. So
yeah, everybody gets in the sport to get weaker and smaller.